Changes, a sprint weekend, and the potential for more torrential downpour. Welcome to the Ardennes, welcome to the Belgian Grand Prix for 2025, welcome to Circuit de Spa-Francorchamps again. And I'll start off with the schedule. We have a bumper weekend with F3, F2 and the Porsche Super Cup all included. So we'll start off with Friday's action. I'll give it in local time. For UK time, you just take an hour off. So for example, F3 practice opens up the weekend on Friday at 9 o'clock local time, so that's 8 o'clock UK time. F2 practice is at 10 o'clock. Then you end up with the FP1 for F1 at 12:30, F3 qualifying at 2 o'clock, F2 qualifying at just before 3 o'clock at 2:55, and then you end up with the F1 sprint qualifying at 4:30. So in the UK, that's at 3:30. Porsche Super Cup rounds up the action at 6 PM local time. Saturday opens up with the F3 sprint at 9:15, that's 8:15 for those of us in the UK, followed by Super Cup qualifying at 10:25. The F1 sprint is at midday, or it's 11 o'clock UK time. Then we end up with the F2 sprint at 1:45 local time. F1 qualifying at 4 PM local, 3 PM UK, and then that, I believe, rounds up the action for Saturday. Sunday will kick off with the F3 feature at 8:30 or at 7:30 UK time, the F2 feature at 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock UK time, the Porsche Super Cup race is 11:45 local, so that's 10:45 UK time, and then the Grand Prix starts off at 3 PM local, 2 PM UK. But yeah, the weather is going to have an impact over the course of the weekend, and I'm going to read you the BBC's forecast for it, especially surrounding Spa. There could be some rain on the Friday. Expect that around the time of sprint qualifying. There's forecast for a chance of rain starting at around 1 PM. And that goes through, really, through the night, actually. It goes on until about 9 PM. So, periodic showers, potentially some wet weather, potentially the use of intermediate tyres. Saturday appears to be dry. The only time there's a likelihood of rain, according to BBC's forecast, is around midday, so around the time of the sprint, but even then it's negligible. We're saying 8% precipitation. Sunday, on the other hand, has thunder and showers throughout the day. We're talking about the rain starting most likely around 9 o'clock. And it will be persisting, passing through the area for the entirety of Sunday. Like I said, there's a chance of thundery showers, there's a chance of lightning in the area. Humidity is going to be up at the time of lights out, about 72%, peaking at around 74%. We're not talking necessarily the likes of 2021, but we are talking the likelihood that this gets designated a race, that you could look at drivers and teams compromising their setups, changing their setups so that Friday is for a wet sprint qualifying and a dry sprint, and then Saturday is for a dry qualifying and a wet Grand Prix. It could be absolutely wild. And throw into that all of the different changes that are going on as well. The biggest changes in the couple of weeks that we've had off have been at Red Bull and Racing Bulls. Laurent Mekies has been promoted to team principal of Red Bull, replacing Christian Horner, who is still, I believe, employed by the organisation through to the end of this year, but has been relieved of all of his duties. So Horner is out, Mekies is in, he's come up from Racing Bulls, and Alan Permain, who was essentially the deputy for Laurent Mekies at Racing Bulls, is now the leader at Racing Bulls. So changes in 2 of the 10 teams at the grid. It could have a massive impact. This is going to be the first race that Red Bull has without Christian Horner at the helm. It sounds strange because that kind of longevity is not there in Formula 1 nowadays, but 20 years without Christian Horner at the helm, it's wild. So we could expect some tumultuous times, but I wouldn't put my hopes on it. Red Bull are a professional organisation. Mekies is a professional himself. I would expect this to be a more seamless transition than we've seen at some team organisations in the past. But yeah, let's have a look back at 12 months ago, because part of the reason why I picked Mercedes to the backing for this video is because it was good for them last year. It was a win for Lewis Hamilton, originally for George Russell, but document 44, after lap 44, disqualified car 63 for having an underweight car. The joke was that George Russell went to the toilet a bit too much before the race. So, yeah. It was the DSQ. The only other retirement was Zhou Guanyu for hydraulics. But it was, seemingly, a Mercedes weekend. Oscar Piastri caught up in the closing stages, and Lewis wanted to be let past George. But Mercedes were happy to let them race. Lewis Hamilton had already won the British Grand Prix that year, and so they didn't mind if there was a little bit of a battle between the two drivers and if George came out on top on that occasion. Like I said, he did initially cross the line first, but he was disqualified. Lewis Hamilton became the race winner. Max Verstappen was the fastest in qualifying. In fact, in qualifying, Lewis qualified 4th and George Russell qualified 7th, but Max Verstappen had a 10th-place grid penalty for changing the ICE components. So, it was a fascinating weekend this time last year. Remember, the front row was Charles Leclerc and Sergio Perez. But could it be a Mercedes win again? Could it be Antonelli's first win? Could it be something else? Because I'd say for once to watch, the changing conditions throughout the weekend will change the fortunes of the different drivers. So, for example, Lewis Hamilton is great in the wet. So is Max Verstappen. And whilst their cars may not be up at the pointy end of the field, they can perform quite well. Likewise, flatter tracks and smoother surfaces tend to suit Mercedes. Now, Spa has got some of the greatest elevation change that we see in the whole season. It's not particularly as much as altitude, but it is the Ardennes. It is also slightly cooler. We're talking air temps that will peak on the Sunday around 20 degrees, but the humidity can also have an impact on how these cars perform. What I'd say is Spa is a relatively new surface. It was a relatively smooth surface historically, but it was resurfaced around 2022 for the upgrades that allowed the motorcycle racing to return to Circuit de Spa-Francorchamps. So, in a way, this circuit does play more to Mercedes' strengths. Remember, they don't have to worry about porpoising that much anymore. So, it could be that we see the Silver Arrows go flying through the Ardennes. It could be that we see the Prancing Horses up at the top. It could be that Max Verstappen does another wet weather masterclass like we saw at Sao Paulo, another smooth circuit track which has a bit of elevation last year. I mean, it could also be the McLaren show up and dominate. It could be that we end up seeing another 1-2, and it could be that they run off into the distance in the wet and in the dry. But the weather often tends to be a great equaliser. I mean, heck, didn't we see that at Silverstone? Hulkenberg getting his first podium? Wouldn't it be wild if he got 2 podiums in a row after 230 odd races of not getting onto the finishing podium? I wouldn't be surprised, to be honest, if one of the races this weekend we saw a repeat of what we just saw at Silverstone. A McLaren 1-2 with Hulkenberg in third. I would say that the drivers are closest to a home race, so Hulkenberg, for example. But also remember, Lando Norris is part Belgian. Max Verstappen is part Belgian. He was born in Belgium. I'd say that for them, where it's their second home races, essentially, they could run pretty well this weekend. Anyways, as always, folks, let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching and joining, and until next time, it's bye-bye for now.